So, Greg, one of the big challenges that Christianity faces intellectually and existentially in our lives is that people suffer. Christians suffer, non-believers suffer, and for hundreds and hundreds of years, as you're well aware, non-believers have raised this issue with Christians and said that there is an inconsistency in suffering in the world and the existence of God. And that objection has taken many forms, and there's been many different versions of the debate. Leaving all that stuff aside, as important as it is, leaving it all aside for a second, can you boil down for us exactly what the problem of evil really is? Why is evil a problem?
Okay. Well, the problem of evil is not merely asking a question. Why does God permit this? Why does God permit that? There might be lots of questions we can answer. It doesn't follow that Christianity is false. The problem of evil is really an argument against God from the phenomenon of significant pain and suffering in the world. And really, the argument against God is generated from the very attributes of God himself. If God is all-knowing, then he'd be able to eliminate all of this evil in the world, this significant pain and suffering. If he were all-powerful, he'd be able to do it. And if he were all-good, surely he would want to do it. Since we as Christians are not going to be willing to give up one of the attributes of God in order to solve this problem, that would be a kind of jumping out of the frying pan into the fire. We're going to have to supply some kind of reason, apparently, for why God permits evil, despite the fact that he's all-knowing, all-powerful, and all-good. And really, I think for many unbelievers, it's the fact that they tend to be dissatisfied with the reasons that we offer, that they conclude there is no reason that would justify God in permitting, well, maybe he could permit some evil, but not so much pain and suffering, or not some really horrific cases of suffering that we know about in the world. And that would really be the problem of evil, and an argument against the likelihood, at the very least, of God's existence, if not for the impossibility of his existence.
So what are some ways then that Christians have responded to that and tried to resolve that problem, that difficulty that's there? How have Christians done that?
Well, if you take the central claim of the unbeliever or the objector to Christianity or the skeptic or the agnostic to say, look, there is no reason that God could have to permit evil, this is a claim that's being relied upon in the argument. And so to defeat an argument, you have to critically assess the claims. And actually, as Christians, we're spoilt for choice as to how we respond to that claim that God does not have a sufficient reason for permitting evil. One way we could do it is just overturn the claim. You say that God doesn't have a reason. I say unto you, God has many reasons. Let me name them for you. And then you give what's known as a theodicy, a justification of the ways of God to men by supplying a reason. So I cover quite a few theodicies in my classes on the problem of evil. But you could refer to a punishment theodicy. Pain and suffering in the world is a result of God's judgment against sin. People have made themselves liable to this by way of their own choices. You could have a kind of pain as God's megaphone theodicy, where someone would say, our hearts are deeply rooted in sin and rebellion against God. God needs to some way to get our attention without sort of destroying us as persons in the process and violating our free will, perhaps, or integrity as human beings. And pain is God's megaphone, as C.S. Lewis puts it, to get our attention so that we would cry out to him and perhaps meditate upon the fragility of life and his worthiness to be worshipped and these various things. Another theodicy would be to sort of slough off the existence of evil as sort of an unwanted but required byproduct of the laws of nature. We need to live in a stable environment. We need to know that when we make a choice, for instance, to hug our wife, let's say, when we come home, that our hands aren't going to turn into knives, right, and kill someone. If I'm going to shake your hand, that all of a sudden the law of inertia goes on holiday, and I end up punching you, or something like that. We need to live in a kind of stable environment to have meaningful exercise of free will. Right. But if that's the value of there being laws of nature in place, then there might be some unfortunate consequences. God's not going to repeal the laws of nature just because we trip at the top of the stairs, right? Or the wind blows shut the car door on our thumb, or that kind of thing. So much evil, particularly natural evil, disasters and things like this, oftentimes are said to be the result of the laws of nature intersecting, bumping up against each other, that kind of thing. A final theodicy would be something like a higher order goods theodicy. that God in his omniscience knows that there are certain goods that are extremely valuable, but God cannot attain those goods without permitting the actuality or at least the possibility of certain evils.
Right.
And so God permits those evils because they are a means to a greater good that he ensures. So you can't show generosity to the poor unless there are the poor.
Okay.
You can't show bravery in the face of battle unless there is battle.
Yeah.
Right? You can't show compassion towards the sick unless there are those who are sick. You can't forgive others unless there is a need for them to be forgiven because they've sinned against you. If
And those are good things. And
if
we
it's
want that.
if it's right that these are deep goods, not
Right.
superficial goods, right? Then we need to see their value as such that perhaps God has permitted in and allowing the evil that would make those goods possible. So there's lots of limitations to those theodicies.
Sure.
I don't accept all those theodicies equally. Part of our task as Christians is to think through these, see where the pressure points are, that kind of thing.
But the language of accepting all of them equally suggests that any one of these may have value here, and therefore we don't want to rule it out. But it also means there could be limitations we might not want to rule it completely in.
Yes, I think Christians can misuse this whole theme of theodicy, right? As if now that I've hit upon these possible reasons, I need to go around and pronouncing to people, well, this is God's reason why your mom is suffering from cancer. This is God's reason why he allowed so-and-so to die in a car crash. The scriptures give no encouragement to that view. We actually don't know enough, right? Jesus himself explicitly warns us against speculating why the tower falls upon various individuals. But an interesting insight from the Christian philosopher William Alston is that maybe we don't know enough to rule these theodicies in any particular case. Perhaps, though, we don't know enough to rule them out. And that's enough to have something to say about the problem of evil.